presentation, go over some items, and hand it over to Cheryl with their scenarios, and then I get to close it out, be the closer.
Thank you, sir.
The first thing I wanted to go over, I think everybody has a copy of this, is the timeline. For some people, it may be confusing. It's new to me, so a lot of this is confusing. So I want to go over some key dates on this timeline. The first date is obviously tonight, which is a work session and a discussion on the budget, public hearing notice. I think the key thing for the timing on this is Cheryl has to have the ad, the draft budget ad, to the Star by March the 3rd, which is on the calendar. And so the key point on this is in the ad is establishing the budget, and what'll go in there also would be the tax rate. As you know, the current rate is 61 cents. At the meeting, a couple of meetings ago, they decided on 61 cents. What everyone needs to understand is whatever rate goes in the ad is not a final rate. What that does is it establishes a upper limit for the rate. Anything that goes in the ad can be changed up until the meeting on April 19th, was the meeting everyone wanted to establish a date to ensure before any decisions were made, they have a new member on the board. So going forward, the only thing that would be finalized is a maximum rate. So if the ad goes in with the 61 cents, you cannot raise above the 61 cents, but you can lower it. And I think that's the only thing that's set in stone once that ad goes in. March 3rd's date, obviously I just stated that the budget ad goes to the Star. That's in a draft form, but even in the draft form, it goes out to final on the 9th. She can only make minor changes after that. She could not go in there and make wholesale changes to that ad for the budget and reassessment rate. March 8th is the next meeting. That's next Wednesday. It's the final work session before the budget public hearing, which is following the work session, and then there will be the public hearing. There is no action required at that meeting. March 9th, I discussed, is the deadline for the budget ad. March 22nd is the budget public hearing on the budget. At that meeting, no action is required. And then the original date, I can't read it up there, but it says that the 12th is the original date. The board decided to extend that to April 19th. That way they would have the new board member on board before any final decision was made on the rate and the budget. So that would be April 19th. Yes.
Quick question on that. On the 19th, if we have the rate set, say we've set the rate at whatever, we do not have to have the official budget completed at that point, right? All we have to have is the rate set by the 19th. Is that correct, Cheryl?
That's correct.
That's correct. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Let me interrupt. If you want to do it on the 12th, I'd be happy with that. Just saying.
And I did put,
I'll second it.
and I did put the 12th in there, so if the board decided they still can do it on the 12th. It is just after the last meeting, they voted for the 19th. April, and the key thing is there is for that tax rate, because the tax bills get mailed out on April 26th. And I think technically the final budget, the drop dead date is June 30th. I'm sure, logistics.
There's lots of things that are happening before that
Right.
date, whether it's hiring, whether it's open enrollment, whether it's signing contracts, so. But yes, to answer a short answer to your questions, yes.
So that's the timeline. I wanted to go over if there are any questions on this, or.
Just to respond to Mr. Wondorf and Mr. Thatcher, I'm 100%, I'd like to pass it today and set the rate at 51 cents. You and I'd be on the same boat, same sheet of music there, my friend.
You have it both, we do not.
All right, I wanted to cover the next item is we've got several items that are still outstanding. I can tell you we've been working fast and furiously on a lot of these, and I've received a lot of the information. Two key items today. One of them is the outside the county deputy analysis. That's to take a look at the deputies that live outside the county, the distance for which you can calculate mileage. The discussion on what type of fire apparatus, if indeed there was a fire apparatus purchased for the fire department. I have a lot of that information. Steve's out, so he wasn't able to be here tonight. He is ill. Final decision on any new positions or old positions, but primarily new positions. I wanted to introduce George Hummer's here tonight. For those of you who don't know, he is the new school superintendent. He's attending the meeting as a spectator. Didn't want to put him under the spotlight tonight. But thanks for coming, George. But I think It's important that the school makes a presentation of their budget in front of this board, which is their intention to do so. That'll be scheduled in one of the work sessions, or perhaps at a meeting. I don't think it's been finalized. Outside agencies, presentations, if indeed this board wants to do that, it's up to the board. You know, last year they did it. I don't believe they do it every year, so that's an option. Another big item we're working on that was discussed at the last meeting was justifications for any increases. And now, to explain that further is, if indeed we are to approve these items, what is it the taxpayers' services will receive? What do the taxpayers get for that? And on the other side of that, if we cut these things, what will the taxpayers or services, what will they not be receiving? We've been doing a lot of work in that already, gathered a lot of that information. We'll have that prepared for you shortly. One item that was outstanding that I looked up, it was a question on the meal tax, you know, if that was an alternative funding source. Currently, that rate is at 4 cents. It can be increased up to 6 cents, and in general numbers, I think this changes, but generally, 1 penny generates approximately $1.6 million in revenue. So for anyone wanting the information on that. As far as the timing, it doesn't have to be done at the same time as the county budget. It can be done at different times. With discussion with the attorney, the only key thing is to ensure that you have enough time, if you were to approve it, that any businesses that were affected have a chance to either vote 1, comment on it, and 2, if it were indeed passed and you change it, they have time to make adjustments. And I've told you everything I know about the meal tax. And the next item is, we've been working very hard. One of the things that was brought up was cutting costs. So Cheryl has pulled out her scalpel, has been at the budget, and she's looked at different scenarios. So she's gonna present the various scenarios which she has handed out to everyone.
Okay, does everyone have a scenario sheet? It's easier for me to go off the sheet because I think it's really small up there. So, we did A and B last week, and then Sean asked us to add C. We did make a couple changes in A and B. Scenario A is a 4-cent tax increase. Scenario B is a 6-cent. The items that are in tan are the ones that change as you go across the sheet, and the items in blue are school related. One of the things that we did last time at our scenario is we just told you what the expenses were in this book. And so at this meeting, we wanna point out, even though the operating expenses are 8.1 above, present level, it does reflect 4.6 cuts already made to it. And those cuts can be itemized in the blue and white form in this book.
Okay, so, you said 8.1 for A, we're almost
Okay, so 8.1 is in the book.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and so I'm just showing you that there were $12.7 million worth of increases and $4.7 million worth of cuts, and that's what equals to 8.1.
Okay.
Okay? As we go down through this, the first tan area that we have, showing a cut is, our salary increases. That's for $350,000. That takes the proposed increase from 7 to 6.5. In scenario C, it further reduces it to a 6% increase, which takes another $350,000.
Cheryl, can I ask you a quick question there? As you talked about pay and salaries. I know in the federal government, most of those are getting a 4% bump this year. I haven't seen what the state is. Have we looked to see what the state's gonna bump their salaries up as far as to try to be competitive?
So the state's talking between 5 and 7. I know Winchester, I think, is on 7. I think Clark County's on 7. I'm not sure about some of the other areas.
Where can I get that information? From the state?
What's your exact
From
question?
the state.
Yeah, I'd like to see what they're giving all their workers as a combined, from VDOT to the state police. You know, what are they looking at as far as their raises go? I think we need to be comparable, or, you know.
I can ask that question. I don't know if they have that answer yet.
And if I may interject, we've
Okay.
already started putting together that chart, so we have several of the organizations, and we're putting together that in a larger chart, so we're gathering that information starting today.
Okay.
Both the Senate and the House add 7%.
In Virginia?
Frederick Water's doing so also.
I'm sorry?
Frederick Water we're doing so.
7, okay, yeah, we checked with Clark, so they're also going to.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Flip side of that is private sector, you know, what are they doing? And I think the private sector is running, I've talked to some private business owners and they're running, you know, 3-4%. I heard nobody say 7%. So as a taxpayer, I know we're having a high inflation situation, but you know, that's an issue. So, you know, as a taxpayer, I'm saying, you know, if I'm getting a job, I'm getting $4, I'm having to pay an extra $3 for somebody else. That's what's wrong.
And I looked at a national number, did some research to try and find, you know, it's very difficult for any organization to try and calculate, you know, what a national average is, but when you go to SHRM, which is the National Human Resource Association, their number they said for the 23 was 4.6%. That was from the SHRM, which is the best I could find.
4.6.
4.6, that was SHRM.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dunn?
Yes, sir.
We live by your CPI number for a number of years. I would remind you of that.
Okay.
And that's 6.5.
Six-
As of February.
6.5 as of February.
February.
I'm asking for what time frame? For the last 12 months?
For February.
For year over year?
And actually, back in June, it was in July, it was 9.2. So it's all those months out, but we used February, I think, for the budget process. And in years past, we went with whatever CPI was, and now CPI is 6.5.
I understand that.
I'm sharing that with you in case you forgot.
I appreciate that, but let me just,
Okay.
like, through the flip side of that is, you know, private businesses do the same thing. And, you know, I'm not seeing them accommodate that. They're saying, you know, this is an unfortunate situation, we have a high inflation rate because of a number of items from a certain administration, cutting energy costs, et cetera, which have an effect, so.
I'm gonna let it go. Yeah.
Mr. Orndorff, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I appreciate that.
So we're on the salary increase line item, so we went from A, B to C across to show the differences. So now in other operating budget cuts, A and B shows 300. C shows that we would do an additional 75,000. In positions, A and B, we are funding 18. C, we are funding 15.
What was that, sir? Just looking at the numbers. Public safety is,
Proposed new position, sheriff, fire and rescue, public
Mhm.
safety. In scenario A and B, that total number of positions is 18.
sheriff, okay, okay.
So my question here is who determined what positions got cut and what positions got cut?
I think, go ahead.
And I was, it was part of my working, one, comments from a supervisor, but also after we read them and put the recommendations, we were reviewing those, and I was meeting with all the department heads individually to hear the different arguments and just making a decision based on those arguments, what seemed to be the most important.
So in looking at this, as far as from where I sit with the finances the way that they are this year, I think we could cut all new positions and have that revenue for other more pressing needs, personally.
Those are decisions that we're here to make. The additional 3 positions that are in scenario C that are not funded, we cut a public safety communication, we also eliminated a Commonwealth attorney and a maintenance position.
So in public safety, then if you have C, you have 10 overall, 10 total, and in A and B you have 11, I'm asking as a question.
Are you taking sheriff and fire and rescue?
No, just talking about the 911 operator.
On the 911 operator, the decision there was, you know, she had requested 4, after discussions, with her, it was her belief she could make it do with the 2, you know, as we discussed in the previous meeting, that was based on the fact as the backup, because she's generally never gonna be fully staffed because of the high turnover. So when we got to C, we were looking for more cuts to get closer to 51-cent rate, so that was my decision to reduce it 1, it puts more of a burden, but it does at least provide 1 backup.
And so if the full number, a fully staffed 911 is 9, I believe, correct?
Yes, I believe you're correct.
So, then does this bring it up to 10?
C does 10, yes, and,
Okay,
and
all
A
right.
and B would be
All right,
11.
thank you.
So what do we need to do? I've asked this question for 3 years. What do we need to do to keep our turnover ratio down? It costs money to hire new employees, to train new employees. And I would much rather see us pay employees and keep employees and have good employees that have good knowledge of the job than to hire additional employees and continue to have just this rapid turnover ratio. What needs to be done to fix it? And to date, I've not gotten any answers on how to fix it. Money is part of the situation. Obviously, working conditions can also be a part of it. Have we had it, where do we stand?
That's one of the reasons you go over staff, and, you know, I've had a lot of knowledge, done a lot of research on this, my previous positions. There's probably no more difficult job to keep filled than this job, because the pressure is so high and the strain so great. You're gonna have an ongoing issue with losing people, no matter what the pay is. I think obviously, the more pay, the more stress and pain someone's willing to suffer. So I think that was the theory behind it, having 2 extra known just because of the high pressure. I think as you had discussed last year, it's kind of like overstaffing to ensure at least you're always fully staffed, because it's just such a high pressure job. It's one of the most difficult jobs in government.
I understand that, but it still doesn't answer my question, and I appreciate it.
Well, I tell you, a lot of people have looked at many cases, when they were looking at, the communications, how to keep people, it's been done nationally in organizations. What they did is they found out for a while, oh, we're putting all these people in dungeons, because if you look at public safety bills, they always tend not to have windows and this, so they try making them look nicer, they try doing all these things. I don't think anyone has really found a great answer for that yet anywhere. And obviously, if you pay them more, people are willing to, take more pain.
Okay. So, scenario A has a 4-cent real estate tax increase, which equals to 6 million, which is in the blue. B is 9 million, which is equivalent to 6 cents. And scenario C is no tax increase, which is equivalent to 0. The next section, we're trying to show you the employees that are not funded. They're listed. Scenario A and B have 12, scenario C has 15. All this is subject to change, it's just kinda like what we're laying out. The blue line that talks about the tax increase, also, we provided to you what the schools have requested, the 9.2 million operating, and we're trying to show you that the available funds that could be used to fund this, and how much would be unfunded in the schools operating based on each scenario, which is 3.8 unfunded, 800 unfunded, and 9.2 million unfunded. Does anyone have any questions about this spreadsheet? Okay.
Are we in discussion on A, B, and C as far as trying to figure out where we go? So,
Part of the discussion we should certainly have.
I was gonna go ahead, if I may, and finish this, and
Oh,
maybe,
okay,
maybe,
sorry. Okay.
it may help out the discussions and some of the items we've talked about, is looking at these.
Cheryl?
Yes.
So on the one that's not funded, you have, certain scenarios across here. So if they're not funded, were these initial requests that were not funded, or is this initial stuff from the current budget that is being dropped?
So like, give me an example, are you talking about the school operating or the positions, what are you talking about?
Okay, so, take A.
Take A, okay.
So, reassessment, 61,000. So when it says not funded, these 12 positions include reassessment clerk of the court, is that what you're telling me?
This is an additional position that was requested in FY '24.
Okay, so clerk of the court, Commonwealth attorney, these are all added up to the 12 positions, which add up to 988,000.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And school operating requested in this scenario, the school is getting an additional 9.2.
The school is requesting additional 9.2, and this scenario funds 5.3 of that request.
Okay.
Which leaves them an unfunded balance of 3.8.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So to continue on with further discussion, the questions were, how do you deal if you wanna cut more costs, where can you look, and and I've had a lot of discussions with different supervisors about different issues, so I started looking at, where do you look at, and these are typical things you do in an organization. One is delay maintenance costs where possible. 2, delay purchase of vehicles. 3, delay purchase of IT assets. You can always look at reducing services. You can fill any gaps with the capital fund. If you have any shortfalls and you so decide, you can pull money from your capital fund. And the last item I discussed earlier, you can eliminate all new positions. So these are all items we look at as options, looking at further cuts. Long term. The long term doesn't help you for this year, but you know, one of our goals and one of my goals long term in the organization is how do we find ways to do more with less in the long term. We've been working on this for quite some time. We've actually did a presentation to the HR committee probably a couple weeks ago. And one of the main primary ways in any business, you know, coming from the business side originally, you look at these types of things, and one of the most important things you can do is you look at all your systems. How do your systems work, and find a way to improve both the mechanical part of the systems, the people side of the systems, the software systems, and the private side. That's how they find ways to reduce costs in the long term, is to work on those types of things. 2, this is one I think key things for us is training for employees to improve skills, because more skilled employees can accomplish more and learn how to use some of the new technology and new systems. Productivity increases, you know, it's very typical, I think, in the government side, you look at costs, but oftentimes in government, you forget to look at the productivity. The idea is if your employees can improve productivity and do more with less, then you end up driving down that number of staff, and you'll find with government, one of your largest costs is probably close to 50%. So the more productive you are, the less staff you need. And where I worked in the past, that was always our long-term goal, to reduce costs. I like this one, it's just a favorite buzzword of mine, is to wherever you can see bureaucracy, is find ways to eliminate bureaucracy. Eliminate non-value added work. One of the things I've done watching here over the last 14 months is to, you know, keep an eye on what's going on and take a look at what are people doing that actually adds no benefit to the organization. Sometimes, we all seen this, people get to doing things they've done forever, and you ask them why they're doing, well, that's what we've always done. So you try to analyze everything you're doing and get rid of anything that doesn't add any benefit, and that's one thing you don't do anymore. But this all leads to where want to go in the long-term direction of controlling costs and keeping costs down low is having a workforce that's, one, well-trained and highly motivated employees. And the goal there is to lower, and I generally don't use an acronym without spelling it out, but I kind of made this one up myself. It's employees per thousand. This to me is one of the best measures when you're looking at productivity and performance measures for organizations, KPI. And the goal being is you can compare yourself to like-sized organizations, one, to get an outside look at where you stand and what you're accomplishing. And that's one of the measures we're going to introduce. It's not as easy as you think, because you can't just go look at organizations and look at how many numbers people they have in this area, how many numbers they have in this area, because all the organizations, all the different functions are doing different things. So the most difficult part of that analysis is getting to an apples-to-apples comparison. It can be done, it just takes a little time. But the nice thing is, one, once it's established, you can compare yourself to other organizations, and 2, it's a good measure over time of how you're increasing productivity. Discussion items, I put these on a PowerPoint, because these are several items and discussion topics that different supervisors brought to me over the last week in discussions. You know, when you're talking about the tax rate, one of the questions is long-term sustainability. If you have the 51% tax rate, is that sustainable long-term? What's gonna happen in the future when other costs go up or such? The other thing you have to look at on an ongoing basis is inflation. How is inflation going compared to how much your increase in revenues go up compared to how much inflation is going up year by year? It was nice for many years because we were always at 2 or 3%, and now we're in those crazy years, and who knows what's going to happen with this economy. The other question is last year we did a presentation on the 10-year plan for the fire department, and I don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head, but part of that plan was over 10 years. It was 80 firefighters. It was several different types of apparatus for the fire department, and those are going to add to your costs long term. And if you're going to go in that direction, it's figuring out what tax rate will support that. Future property values, this year, as you saw, we had that large increase in the property values. I don't anticipate that going forward for a few years with the economy, but who knows what the future holds. You know, I'll give you 100 economists on, you'll get 100 different opinions, and I have my own. The other thing is, one of the things that seemed to be a strong opinion last year is everyone wanted to make sure on an ongoing basis, we always had funds in there for transportation, and we always set aside transportation so we don't fall behind in transportation, to ensure you have those funds. And then capital contributions. As we put down in the previous slide, one of your options for filling any gap is to use your money from your capital fund. The downside of that is the capital fund is a great advantage to have if you're looking at a fire department or looking at any long-term capital costs. It alleviates the need to borrow. So if you're trying to avoid borrowing or minimize your borrowing costs, you need to build up capital. So those are issues that have been brought up to me by various supervisors. Going forward, we have several more work sessions. You all have the calendars that outlines them, and the next work session, what we'll do is, after talks, we will schedule it, have a better agenda so you know which speakers are coming, what items will be discussed, so to enable you to prepare and send any questions you may want to send ahead of time. The school presentation to present their budget, just so resolve all these outstanding items that we have on outstanding, and several of them being worked on as we speak, and I have some actually already, and I'll send them out tomorrow. And any other presentations this board made, what the CEO presented to the board. And I finished back on the timeline just to make sure we have the critical dates, and especially is important because it's the big date coming up. The most important one is that the ad has to be in by March 3rd, and by March 9th, you can make some minor changes, not significant changes. As it stands now, the board voted, or I think by consensus a few meetings back, on the 61 cents. So otherwise, another vote, that would be the ad going in there unless this board would so desire to change it. And as I stated earlier, that's not a final tax rate or what the tax rate will be for the county. That establishes the maximum you can do as you go through this process. I.e., you cannot go higher than 61 cents, but you can go lower. And that's any time up to April 19th, correct, Cheryl? For the,
April 19th is when
this
is when the treasurer and the commissioner needs a tax rate.
Yeah, they prefer it on the 12th, but I think you voted at the last meeting to extend that to the 19th, if I'm not mistaken. The 12th makes it easier logistically. That's it. I forgot to put a VM slide in there. I apologize.
It's okay.
That's the easiest slide too.
Discussion, thoughts? Anyone?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Taking a look at, we're moving ahead, trying to decide what we're gonna advertise, and basically where we are. We moved the date so we would have the new board member on board. And if we go, and I know Supervisor Graber would like to be at 51 cents, but if we do 51 cents now, that kind of locks that person in. That comes in, really there's no discussion at that point. So in order to give them an opportunity to see something for the people of Gainesboro that they're going to represent, they can certainly go back down to 51, but they at least gives them some room to move. If we would, do the 4 cent or 6 cent, advertising anyway, they can always come back and go backwards. So that would be my thought. I think we need to advertise something that allows that new person an opportunity to have some movement, and not constrain them to 51 cents. Number two, just me personally, after looking at some of these things, 51 cents, when you look at sustainability, and I think that's crucial in Frederick County, I just don't think that provides where we need to be. It's not looking forward. We're staying in the status quo. It doesn't move the county forward. So, but those are my two thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So I want to discuss the capital fund a bit,
Okay.
since that was option 2 on one of your charts. So we've been digging into the numbers, you've been helping me, thank you much, Mr. Ballhofer, and I believe there's 36 or maybe $44 million in the capital fund currently that's not earmarked for any current project, and that's beyond the 17% funds held in reserve, and beyond everything that is earmarked, is
Yeah,
that
it's
right?
approximately, at the last time I think we measured 36.1 million.
Okay, so one thing I don't wanna do is raise taxes on people when we're sitting on $36 million of capital fund money that's not earmarked for anything. That's not to say it won't be at some point, but, I think we'd have to justify to the public, you know, why we're holding that large amount of funds and then allowing taxes to increase. I have a question related to that, and that is, so how would that capital fund be further increased or reduced under this budget? We've seen requests for capital. We've seen in the school budget, for example, a very expensive refurbishment of a school, more than any high school we've ever built before. And we've seen also a record-setting new high school proposal. Are those factored into what would happen with the capital fund?
I don't believe any of the capital fund has been used for anything for school. I do know that in the capital fund, what we took out of the budget and earmark was a fire station for the Stephen City, for lack of a better name, fire station, and the apparatus, and those items, and then we shifted, I think, the sheriff's cars to that fund. I don't remember what that exact amount is, she may have it.
So as far as school construction, that has not been discussed to be, to reduce the capital fund. I'm trying to find my sheet on his capital. It's usually things like, vehicles, new parking lots, HVAC,
So what would happen to the $36.1 million fund we currently have under the budget we're looking at? I realize we're talking about operating now, but other factors in.
I believe, in memory, if memory serves me, that amount was close to 13 million. Does that seem to be correct to you? I'm guessing.
13 million as far as what's being proposed in this budget.
Out of the 36.1 for things like the fire station.
That was your sheet, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember the
can't
number, but it
I
was
can't remember.
somewhere
Let me
between.
try to find it for you.
Yeah.
Where is that listed in here? Cause I don't see it.
It was in the very first sheets I gave out in the early meeting, and I'll send you updated copies. Yeah.
It was under budget scenarios, right?
Right, it was the original budget scenarios, and
But are they still in the proposed budget scenarios? Have they not been cut out?
these are based on those sheets, so they're factored in here, yes.
So in most scenarios, it doesn't really talk about capital. Because the way, when we appropriate funds out of that capital fund, it's part of our budget resolution, so it's not really part of the tax, necessarily the tax rate. Does that make sense?
But it was
Okay.
listed as an option for us, and
Yes, it was included in when they came up with these numbers on here to those items, for instance, the fire equipment, the fire station and such were taken directly out of that capital projects fund. Therefore, you don't see it in this part of the budget. I will send you those sheets.
Would you be so kind as to send us a list of everything that's included that will be coming from the capital fund this year, that 13 million, the line item?
I will, yes, all by line, I will forward that to you.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, one more thought. On your list of things that you're still working on, and sorry, I don't mean to add to it, I'm always adding to it. But was the fire department metrics, one of the items that we're still waiting on input? So we had a discussion, the new fire station need was based on a single metric, which was time of first response. And I had asked if that money was used for more personnel or apparatus at existing stations rather than building a new structure. It seems to me we need to look at more than just one metric. I mean, it's a valuable metric, time, quickest response. We all want someone to arrive quickly if we have a fire or a medical situation. But there are other metrics that are equally important. If my local station has only one crew and they deploy and I need more because there's a second call in the area or because it's a major fire and we need more apparatus than they were able to man, the time to get a proper response goes down, even though you might not call it first response time. You get what I mean? It's a different metric, and I had asked if they were gonna do any analysis on other metrics of value, it seems like we could improve responsiveness without building a new station, maybe even better than building one if we do it in the right way.
The part two of that, I'm not sure about. The part one where you're talking about has to look at, the employment systems, i.e. if there's somebody gone, whether the absent here, I believe that has been sent. I believe Steve worked on that. He sent me some information today. I have not reviewed them. But I believe that item has been looked at. But what happens then, you have multiple deployments and how that's handled with the staffing. The number on the capital, and I'll forward it to you all, is 11.7 million is that was removed from the capital projects funds, which brought the balance down to 18.9 million.
Wait,
Josh, going back to your comment on capital. If you take money from the capital fund and use it for employees, you do that in a 1-year time frame, but it doesn't build into multiple years. So I might be missing something what you're advocating. So on a one-time basis, yeah, but then year 2, 3, and 4, you still have to have a revenue source for that, so.
Under those assumptions, we'd have to fix that before we ran out of funds. I'm just questioning how much we would be sitting on in taxpayer dollars that's unused while we're raising taxes.
I'd like to ask every one of my fellow board members this question, and I'd like an honest answer from you. We were shown last week $125 million renovation for a school. Last year, I found $7.2 million going to a school that was getting surplus. Have any of you talked to your school board representatives and asked them what that $125 million does? Because I have. And I asked them how they got to that number. In fact, I talked with Chairman Monk yesterday, and I asked him how he got to that number. He told me that what they did was they called the engineer/contractor and asked, based upon the square footage of the school, what it would cost to renovate it. And they were given a number. And that's the number that was brought forward here. There was no discussion on whether it was in need of a roof, whether it was in need of an HVAC system, whether it was in need of major renovations or minor renovations. There was just a simple number thrown out. So my question is what truly are our needs? Because it seems like we're just going by the numbers that are thrown at us, but we're not doing the due diligence to find out what's behind those numbers. I did the due diligence for that school. I'm working on doing the due diligence at that school. I've asked several times to do a walkthrough of that school. Still haven't had the opportunity yet. Does it need $125 million renovations? I don't know. In fact, the chairman of the school board couldn't tell me that because he said they didn't get the engineer to draw up what the true needs were and what they weren't. So if some of you have had that, if you've walked through that school and you've looked at it, you've had some drawings, engineer has come back to you and said, yeah, it needs a new roof on it, it needs a new HVAC system, heating and cooling. I'd love to hear from you what that conversation held, because according to the school board chairman, that conversation hasn't occurred. The bigger question that I have is they came to us September a year ago and asked for a renovation of the heating and cooling systems for the transportation department and said it would cost a little over $800,000. We gave them that money. They've since not replaced the HVAC system, as the conversation yesterday, and the bill's now over $1.6 million, which is double what we gave them. So my question is, we continue to give money to things, but we're not getting any answers. So I'd like to ask each of you, have you walked through the school? Where did they come up with that $125 million? Why are we having conversations on what our quote unquote needs are if we don't really know what our needs are? Has anybody walked through the school? Has anybody?
Yep.
Okay, and have you talked with anybody in construction? Have we looked at what the true needs are there that needs to be renovated?
So let me give you some comments.
I'd love to hear it.
So if you remember ballpark, I don't know, a year ago, and don't hold me to this, but I spent 3/4 of the day going through Millbrook and I went through Sharando. And the purpose of the meeting, I was there with Jim Angelo, another gentleman who was no longer there. The purpose of the meeting was to deal with the following issues, and that was on capacity. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this board voted about $9.x million to build an extension to Millbrook. That didn't occur. So I went back and said, fine. If you take a look at 10-year projections, right now, it was like 1,000 students approximately for the whole school system, not just for the high school, for the whole school system. And so how do you meet that need? So it's not a build a school, it's build how to deal with the capacity issue. So if you build something behind Milford, then the question is, what does that give you? It could be a 20 rooms, 400 seats. So that takes care of part of that. Then you go over to Sharando. In Sharando, I don't know what the number is, but they have like 10, 11 trailers out back. I talked to Kevin Kenny and we had a initial discussion, not dealing with numbers, but the question was, I know he may be in this room, but can you do an extension to Sharando, ideally? You wipe out all the trailers, you put it in a 2-3-story building, does that help to solve the need? His comment was, it would be difficult to do, it might be, we haven't had a chance to go into numbers. I had a conversation with Ellen White, I think yesterday. And when I come back to her with specific requests, I'm fine. What's the cost estimate to do that? For me, the question is, how do you deal with the capacity issue? That's part of it. I've gone through Sharando, I've gone through Milford. And I think it's inappropriate, and I'm sure you'd all agree, to have trailers behind for the long term. I don't mind for a short term, 2-3 year time frame. For long term, that's not an answer. And I don't know, I'm not gonna tell the schools how to run their shop, but if you built Millbrook, could you redesign for, a 2-year time frame so that everybody goes then to Millbrook, you fill up those 400 seats immediately, then you build Sharando, you have another 400, 500 seats, and then maybe it's a way to possibly solve the problem. So that's part of it. So yeah, I've been trying to deal with that issue, and that's part of it. The second question is, there have been people that said, what if the tax dollars follow the child? If that occurs, and then there's a decrease in the total number of students, then you don't have the same need, or you may only have to expand one school and not another school. I spent a day at a private school, and on a cost equivalent basis, they're running their operations to me $12,000. So if you throw in a ball field, you throw in sports, you throw in music, you're running in the neighborhood of $12,000, $13,000 versus our $18,000, $19,000. If you have that type of a shift, then you have a lower cost to taxpayers as a whole. And so then that causes some competition among, schools. I have a chance to go to school A or B or C. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go where it's most efficient. So I mean, that's the wrestling of what we're dealing with. I think we have an obligation to solve problems. I think we have an obligation to resolve an issue at Sharando. And we'll have, 4, 5, 6 weeks to work that through. But to answer your question, yeah, I had done 2 of them.
So to follow up on my comments then, there have been some comments on, we have to look long term as far as to be able to maintain services, and 51 cents, there's a question on whether that can be continued. If we look at what we are funding our schools at, there's a state mandate on what we fund them at, and we are funding them at well over 100% greater than that. Last year, I believe it was 130% additional, just under 130% additional above and beyond what the state said we had to fund them at. If a private school is educating students, and I agree with you on the numbers of $12,000 to $13,000 a student, why did it cost us $19,480, not my numbers, county administration's numbers, for last year? That's a huge difference, even if it's 13 to 19 to $6,000 difference. I think we can find $40 million in the school budget and find where we can meet some of their capital needs. If we pulled that from operations, put it towards some of their capital needs, I think we could meet a lot of the capital needs that they have and fund some of the capital needs in the county. So I think long term, that is how we can have some sustainability. Thank you.
Josh first.
I have some information for the superintendent. If you wish to extend this discussion of the school's capital fund needs, I don't know if that's what we were trying to drive at today in the work session.
I'm sorry, again, what is it that you?
So I have some information from the superintendent on overcrowding at schools, which I wanted to share at some point. If you wanted it this meeting, otherwise I can wait. I know we have certain goals for today's meeting.
Well, we have goals for the next 3, but, and then we're finished, so.
Okay.
What I would suggest, if it works for you, is let's get it distributed. And then have a discussion about it, have an opportunity to read through it.
Okay, so if I
Does
could
that make sense?
summarize instead of at length for a minute or
Sure.
less, then just
Absolutely.
two main points. One is for both of you gentlemen, if I could get where you get the 12,000 per student for private schools, I'd be interested in knowing where that comes from. I have toured some private schools. The most expensive one I visited was like $6,000 per student, so for the full tuition for a year. So I'm not sure how how we think they're operating at 12,000. Maybe they are through
No,
gifts or something that I'm unaware of.
I have no right now.
Okay, and then with regard to the overcrowding, just to summarize, so the total amount of overcrowding with each school was provided. It was given to me at our joint session with the planning commission, and it adds up to roughly 150 students at James Wood, but that's gonna be covered by additional seats, I believe, in the already paid for renovation.
Let's just slow down a second. Take a step back. What was the 150 cover?
At James Wood
Yeah.
High School, the overcrowding.
So yeah, it's 150 overcrowding change, that's what you're saying right now?
Right.
Okay, go on.
And the expansion should cover that, I believe. I've heard numbers in the hundreds
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the expansion and renovation. Millbrook, it looks like you're maybe 200, 150 to 200, and then Sharando is larger, it's about 300, maybe even 350 students. So I did the math, which I'll distribute and share. The school system currently projects that 5 years from now, we'll have about 144 fewer students in the high school grades than we do now. So if you do all the math, our net need after expansions we've already paid for is maybe 300 students. It's below where we're at now in overcrowding by like maybe half. Half the problem's gonna go away naturally, and with the expansion of James Wood. And it's less than a quarter of what the capacity would be of a fourth high school. Now, I'm not saying we're not gonna need that high school in due time. I think we need to see, I believe the high school population will grow again. It's a demographic dip. It's not gonna go on forever. But I think we need to know when that real need will arise. That way we can plan to build the high school and not leave it 2/3 empty, which I fear is what the numbers show right now, if we built it today. So I'll distribute all that information. Thank you.
We have never built a school that was that empty or anywhere near that before. And people always think, oh, you ought to build for expansion, growth. That's money spent before it has to be.
Well, we could.
That's always been a discussion that some people don't understand.
Right.
We agree with, they probably understand it and don't agree.
I mean, in that case, what would probably happen is we'd realign the 4 schools so they'd each be 150 to 200 students out of capacity rather than one school being near empty. But it's still something we need to take into account when it's so expensive.
Yes, sir. Okay. Both of you had their hands up earlier when I recognized Josh. You were Bob.
Bob,
Who wants to go first?
Bob, go ahead.
I didn't even know I had my hand up.
Maybe you're stretching.
Maybe I'm
your neck.
stretching.
I don't know.
But I will take advantage of it.
Wait, Bob, I mean,
Okay.
And since Blaine's gonna let me do it.
They're always available.
Just a quick comment on the financing of private school versus public school. Private schools have the opportunity to pretty much teach what they want to teach. They're not restricted, they're not encumbered by state mandates and so forth and so on. Taking care of special need kids and so forth, that's flipped over to us. And it's a burden on our school system. And a lot of school systems, at one time, I know Shenandoah County was sending their special needs children over to Frederick County because they just didn't have the facilities over there. That might have changed. But there's a lot of those state mandates that aren't required of a private school. So when we talk about differences of cost, and I don't know exactly what those are, but a lot of the higher costs in public education are for those special needs departments that we have to do. They're just required to do. I was gonna say the same thing that Chuck said. The only school in Frederick County I can ever remember that was built not to capacity on day one was Greenwood Mill, and we went into recession right after we decided to build the school. And it didn't take long once the recession ended to fill it back up, and it's above capacity now. I tell people that all the time. We're not building a dream that maybe we'll have some empty chairs and we'll be able to spread them around. They're full. I've been around here a long time, so they've been full every time they've opened up.
I apologize for my comment. You had
Yeah.
earlier insight than I did.
That's okay, but it's interesting. Again, like I say, I think that in Supervisor Graber's case, I agree with him. I think we need to really look into where that money's going. I haven't had a chance to touring in schools. I don't know that that would benefit me other than somebody showing me something, but I have talked to school board members, and again, I pretty much got the same answer you got. Maybe a little different, but not much. And as a business person, you have to have if you're gonna spend this kind of money, you need to have a budget, and you need to stick to it. Unless you have some real discrepancy that comes up and says, I just can't use that for this, I've gotta use this for this. But that's part of the program that we're going through right now, and I agree, I think we need to really look at that. And it's not just schools, it's our administrative system and everything else. We need to make sure that we're spending the money correctly and wisely. And in the school system, we get to do our own here. In the school system, we give them the money and say, spend it wisely, and that's up to the school board and the school administration. And I'd like to see them do well with that and be able to come before the people and say, here it is, and be able to show all those figures and make everybody very comfortable with it. So, yeah, I agree with that.
So, a couple of things, Mr. Wells. Your comments on what's mandated not is apropos. When I was talking to those in private schools, they made the comment, we don't have to go and meet certain mandates because they thought they were cumbersome. I've also had conversations with some principals in Dr. Hummer's school system and some others, and they've said to me, the system's broken. And then I've said, why? And they've gone through some items and saying, the system itself doesn't work, and it's not Dr. Hummer's fault. It's the legislation that says you have to do A, B, and C, you gotta teach to a test, you can't do critical, or there's no ability to do critical thinking. And we're talking to people in the private sector saying, we don't have to teach to a test, we can go and do what we need to do. Then the outcome becomes, okay, I send two people, one in a public school, one in a private school. If they both come out equally well, whether they're a plumber, or going to college, or whatever, then that says something. If one school is coming out with a better quality person than the other, that says something too. From what I've seen so far, you have basically equal output coming from both the public and the private. So if that's the case, then we're gonna solve this problem together, but you go to the General Assembly and say, fine, maybe you have some regulations that are burdensome that don't need to be heard. Or you go to Congress and say the same thing. But the idea is to get Johnny or Susie from K through 12, and when he comes out at 12, he's bright, able to function in society, because 10 years from now, that's a workforce. So that's just one comment. Second comment is, on our total budget, approximately 22% goes for public safety, approximately 49% goes for schools, about 5% goes for social services, and 24% goes for everything else. So that's a breakdown of where we are. And you say, fine, we're gonna go and cut the current budget, which I'll come to in a second. Where do you go? So last year, we put in $8 million for transportation. That was new. That's not been done before. We have $6 million, I believe, in the current transportation budget. We have about $5 million going for public safety. So that 8 and the 6 is $1.4 million. That's a good chunk of change that we did not have 2 years ago. Mr. Gray was talking about safer grants to help to alleviate that, and that's a plus too. So we're just looking at numbers here on how to resolve issues. One of the questions I asked, Mr. Ballhopper was, in this current budget, FY23, if you had to go and make some additions or make some cuts, where would you do it? And basically, there weren't a whole lot of areas to do that. Some people here suggested that we, make cuts. On a cost per employee, 20 years ago, 2022, on that core administration point, you were at a core of 3.1 employees per 1,000. Today, it's 2.8, so it's come down. 10 years ago, it was 3.3. And I can share this chart, which basically is taking out all county employees, taking out public safety, social services, fire and rescue, and the jail, and then say what you have for everything else. So in that sense, we've become more efficient as we're going through. If some of you have, and I've said this publicly, if you have better ways to go and make cuts than just lay them out, then we can address it. But let's try to deal with the issue. Go ahead.
Blank, what date was your number? 20 what?
2020,
Was your first, and that was how many employees per?
so in 2020, you had 187, sorry, excluding fire and rescue,
You excluded those?
yes.
Okay, because what concerned me about that is we've added 145 plus probably 150 paid volunteer, or paid firefighters that we didn't used to have to pay
No,
for
I don't-
because of our volunteer system, so thank you for that, that's all I needed to
So
know.
let me just make one quick comment. The point of this was, as the population increases, fire and rescue has to increase, public safety has to increase, and we're being mandated to increase social services. So I'm taking that out of the equation to say, fine,
Understand.
what else is, how efficient is the core unrelated to that? And, you know, if you have 1,000 people, then, you know, 1,000 people can go over to, you know, Bill's office and say we have to pay taxes, then you can have one person. Maybe 10,000 people, he's gonna have to hire somebody else. So there's a slight item, but when you go up from 3.1 to 2.8, excluding that, and that's a plus.
We're becoming more efficient, is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Is this Judy?
I just have one question. I wanna get back to budget, and that was talking about the capital request for this year's budget from our schools, and that was 8.5 million. And I believe, Mr. Bullhopper, you said, what was it? 9.2. So you haven't considered in that capital number that you originally provided us, the 18 million that you referred to earlier, I believe. You haven't included the school capital request.
No, it's not included in there.
Thank you for that clarification. And we all received a list of that, which outlined all the things that the school would ask for, fire alarm replacements, et cetera, which totaled that, and that was in an earlier session. Do you recall? Just want that to be on the record too for the next presentation for the capital request.
Anyone?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if we're getting near conclusion, but something struck me today. You were present at the airport
Yes.
terminal groundbreaking. The final speaker was our own native daughter, the Lieutenant Governor. And she said something that really struck me. She gave a summary of budget in Richmond, the fact that it's not done yet, and they expect to be working on it for quite a while. And the one reason that struck me she gave was that she said, trust me, we are turning over all the couches and looking for loose change. We're identifying every dollar, every quarter, I guess she's talking about, that we can save before we raise taxes on the public. So I thought that was a great way to express it, and I think we need to very much be doing the same thing in our own budget.
She's a very sharp individual. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have a question for Supervisor Linda. Last evening, you made a comment with regards, to the budget, with regards to saving millions. Do you have that list outlined as to the list of cuts that you would either make or that you found in the budget?
No, I was referring to the last year's budget
Well,
that
last
we rolled
year's-
into this
last
year
year's
that we're
budget.
operating under.
The current budget's kind of doing last year's, dollar to dollar, so what's your list of cuts that you referred to in cutting millions of dollars?
Yeah, I didn't refer to a list, but I did say that.
I'm asking you, do you have a list?
I do not have a list, but I have specific items from the budget last year. But I could put in a list, but I haven't created a
I'd
list.
appreciate that if you want to share that with the committee.
Others? Anything?
So, Mr. Chairman, next week we're coming back here, reviewing this, and just coming back with additional thoughts. Is that what's on the agenda?
I'm sorry, do what?
Next week, yes, we're coming back here, taking this data, chewing on it for an additional conversation. Is there anything else that's coming?
Yeah, well, if if I may interject, is, yes, because we have those outstanding items, I would like to have all of those addressed before I can send out for the majority of it, send out the information ahead of time, so you all have all that data, come in there, discuss them, and bring in the appropriate department heads to go over those, just so we can get those to bed and move on to the next items.
So, okay, the outstanding agencies, is the copy.
I wasn't thinking of outstanding agencies in the next one, primarily, the sheriff's department with the, cars in the sheriff's
Okay.
department, the fire apparatus, and the,
Okay.
pickup trucks and those items.
Okay, thank you.
Was there any?
I don't need to have a meeting with sheriff, I don't need to have a meeting with fire department on my behalf. I think that there needs to be a lot of discussion on the revenue recovery avenue. I think that'll take care of a lot of our issues in the fire rescue department when it comes to apparatus, when it comes to those types of things. I don't think it needs to be left in the fire chief's hands onto if we buy F-250s or if we buy Ford Explorers. I think it needs to be in your hands. Being his supervisor, I think that you are more than capable of doing an assessment of needs and filling those needs. I'd like to ask everybody on this board to take a look at something that I've been pushing pretty hard, and that is a countywide service authority or a countywide service entity that works on school buses, fire trucks, and everything else. Hanover County has a beautiful one. Encourage you to go look at it. It services a little bit of everything, and it would be something that we should, I think, at least have conversation about. I think we can find a way to save some money there. And I think it would take away the individual abilities from some of these agency heads to buy equipment that is overkill, in my opinion.
Wayne?
One more comment then to everybody here. We're talking about budgets. Our real estate increases does not, so when a house is built, it brings additional revenue to the county. That's not covering the capital costs. I've gone and talked to BACO twice. BACO would support a system to have impact fees covered. We have about 14,000 new houses that are going to be built. They have 14,000 vacant. They have 14,000 lots on which you can build new houses. And so, if that occurs, we're gonna have significant capital costs. And frankly, I think that we had a vote last year, 7-0, to try to have impact fees, but have properties such that we can go and cover those capital costs. So that's a discussion. We're not gonna have this year's budget, but I'm just laying it out, Mr. Chairman, for, the year coming. We have to address the issues. We're either gonna have increased real estate costs, we're gonna have a way to cover capital costs or additional revenue, but that's the fight. I listened to a budget discussion from 2018. It's the same budget discussion we're having today, and I think Mr. Orndorff has been here, since 10 years ago. You can probably say that, 20 years ago, we were having a similar budget discussion. So, I'm not putting you on the spot. So the question is, how do you resolve the issue? Instead of having the same discussion, we're not trying to find a solution that works. So that's for next year's discussion, though. I'll just put it on the table. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
On that subject, I'm afraid for the next 3 years, impact fees or some kind of expansion of proffers is a non-starter if we just ask the government, the state, to change its policy. This governor has gone on the record, you've probably seen it in the newspaper, saying that he's pro-business and he's against any expanded costs on private industry, including home builders, being imposed. So I don't think he's very favorable to such a change. I think if we want to go after that, we have to refine the method. There are a couple counties, I understand, that have exemptions from those restrictions on proffers and impact fees because they were fast growing. I think we need to compare ourselves to those counties. We may find that we have a better case simply by comparing to them, rather than asking for a state policy change, ask to be included since we're a fast growing county and receive a waiver or exemption. I'm not an expert in it, but I think we should look at if all that I hear is correct. We might be able to lobby on that in that direction.
Wayne?
So, we are one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And you can draw legislation that would specifically target this area. You set some parameters similar to what occurred in Fairfax County. And you could do that, so it wouldn't have to be statewide, it could be for this area. I'm trying to address the needs here, not in Charlottesville, not in Richmond, not in Newport News. So there's a way to do that. the cost here is not being added to the developer, the cost is simply being borne by the person who's moving in. So when John Doe moves in here, and then he has kids have to go to a new school, who should pay that cost? Is that cost borne by existing residents, or is that cost borne by the person who's coming in? So, you know, that's an issue. I mean, the county has to grow, but I just think the costs ought to be borne by those that are moving in and generating those costs. It's a pass-through cost to the business. Thank you.
We have time.
So if one of you has a solution to my questions, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I agree with, Mr. Wells and Mr. Graver. You all do decide to set the rate at 51 cents. Then you might as well move the date back to 12, because the new supervisor is Andrew Hyde, so that way it gives Seth and Bill the extra time to get the bills out.
Anyone else? We're not gonna accomplish anything, we probably should all go on to other tasks, but we have plenty of time we could spend yet. We're all here together. Anything?
So,
Yes.
Friday, I need to get a draft to the Star, advertising, budget and the tax rates. So, I need to know how to proceed forward with that.
Basically, I mean, you need a rate to advertise.
I do.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's unfair, we spend time, we change our, rate schedule, so, it's like, Gary said, if we go to 51, there's no need to do any of that, just put 51, that's it. I'd like to see us, I don't have a problem doing 61, because you can always come back, but if you want, take another number, 57, 55, or 51, or whatever, at least give this individual that we're worried about, that is going to be on our board with us, an opportunity to look at something besides, I just jumped on, here I am, so. I would suggest 61, leave it at 61 and back up, but that's just my.
Other comments? Can't keep kicking the can down the road. Coming at us pretty quick.
So I have Sean at 51 and I have Bob at 61. As far as advertising, not.
As far as advertising.
Not appropriating.
No, not appropriate.
Okay.
I need to stress the imagination.
Okay,
You can put me down for 51 cents.
okay.
As well with Sean. I mean, I look at this, the things we're cutting, you add up the grand total numbers, it's still less than I see unearmarked in capital funds, even after the numbers given today for the school's capital fund request. So I'm just not seeing, even if we want all of these positions and things that we're saying would be cut in these three, in that scenario, I'm not seeing where we need to raise taxes in the current inflationary environment when we're sitting on that much and more in taxpayer funds.
So when you would, one of the things, and the reason that we don't really put in transfers out of capital funds for positions, because those would be one-time revenue sources, and it's an ongoing cost, and then we usually get beat up over that.
I mean, you're kicking the can 1 year, then you gotta make up the cost. Capital's only gonna last you a certain period of time, and then you got to backfill it. You know,
I'm gonna help you out, Mr. Wardorf, we can cut $40 million from schools, keep on funding.
You ain't that with me.
I'll go through my thought process, which I've said before. The current rate's 61 cents. neutral rate's 51 cents. 2 years ago, we set a rate, you know, and had a discussion on it. 4 years ago, we did the same thing. If you take the FY '23 budget, the budget we're in right now, you say, fine, assume for a moment you move that to FY '24, is there anything in that FY '23 budget that you can go and reduce? And so, you know, Mr. Warren Buss asked, you know, Mr. Ludwig that. So that's one number. Then you say, what do you want to add for this coming year? And there's another number. Then you set a tax rate. So I just think setting a tax rate today is inappropriate. I think you gotta go, I think you have to be intellectually honest and go through the process. And that's where, you know, some people and I may disagree. You go through the process and say, what can you cut on the FY '23 budget? What then is added? Then you come up with a number. And, we're not there, so, I'm not prepared to do 51, I'm not prepared to do 61. Do the homework, and then we'll come up with a number. That's essentially my thought process. The second thing is, for all of us, you made the comment about impact fees, the way to solve a problem. And, you know, you can drive into that, some of you. Then you have revenue from meals tax. That was discussion by, you know, the administrator. That brings in another $3 million. That's equivalent to 2 cents. So I'm not prepared to make a decision, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to work on numbers and come up with something. So I'm not committed in, and I'll say to everybody here, we have not raised taxes, we have not cut taxes. We're just having a discussion at this point in time, and you just need to recognize that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have about 8 days to accomplish that.
That's fine. I'm just giving you the straight thoughts, you know. Good.
Well, the other comment, again, I go back to, we made a change specifically to bring in some people Gainsborough would have a say. They have no say if we just tonight say it's 51 cents. There's no reason to have a public hearing. I mean, we'll have it, but why should the public come and just, thanks for putting 51 cents. They had no input whatsoever. I want some input, and I think that person who's elected that board ought to have some say in what it is. That's the reason we did that.
We reached that consensus.
So, there you go, that's the reason I'd like to see us advertise something that's, we have a little movement in.
I would encourage any further discussion anyone would have. If not, I would ask Vice Chairman for.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
Whoa.
Well, she's gotta have her tax.
I need to advertise something.
She's gotta have a right.
I have to, yes, I just can't, otherwise, if there's no,
If I could,
yeah, I can't, if I don't have any budget, I don't have a tax rate, I don't have any bills, I don't have any revenue, I
we
need
discussed
all that.
this also with the attorney, cases, attorney, what happens if they don't come up with a number? And if you don't have a number, then it would default to that 61 cents. So if you're unable to come a number, you default to the 61. So if you wanted to adjust that number, you have to make a decision on that.
There was a motion to adjourn, I'll second that motion, let it default to that, go from there. I mean, that's where we are, I don't see us coming to any more conclusions tonight.
I can withdraw my motion, Mr. Chairman, if you want.
I'm sorry? What is it? I couldn't hear you.
I can withdraw my motion if you want to.
I'm asking you all what you want.
You said the default 60.
Pretty much know what I want.
We had this discussion before, you know, we had it 4 weeks ago. We have a default rate. I'm not supporting the default rate, but I'm gonna leave it for discussion, and we come up with a budget number. Each of us comes up with a budget number that we're comfortable with if we go through the homework. Just being intellectually honest on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you where you stand, Mr. Dunn, Supervisor Dunn? Because right now I don't know where you stand. I'm looking to see, I know where the rest of the board stands. We've all stated where we stand as far as 51 or 61 cents. I'd like to know where you stand. If you stand with the 61 cents with the other three, the conversation's closed. If you don't stand there,
So, Mr.
We need to
Graber,
have discussion.
Mr. Graber, we're not having a 61, in my opinion, we're not. as you know, we're here at the 6151 because of the state code, those require certain things. And if you remember, 3 years we were on the board, we've had a discussion, and then we set a rate. And I'm just doing my homework. So, don't say that I have or have not raised tax rates. And you can look at me like that, Mr. Graber, but we're just simply going through it and doing our homework. So I question to you is, okay, if it were not a life and death, would you have an additional $1, 2, or 3 if you need something that was really crucial? If you don't, Mr. Ludwig has made the comment of, raise the areas, we can cut. That you can do that, and I'm open to that. I think Mr. Ludwig has done some good job on saying, where can we do that? On capital costs, I don't mind putting capital costs for capital expenditures. That's a good thing to do. So I'm not making a commitment one way or the other, I'm simply doing my homework, as opposed to setting a rate and then working with that. So, I have in previous years, proposed rate, I'll support rate if it's necessary, if it's justified. So that's where I am. For Mr. Graber, 51 cents is a 20% increase. I'm not for that, I'll tell you that right now.
Okay, so I had Bob at 61, I had Sean and Job at 51. We adjourned, and that means we go with a default of 61. Is that where I'm at?
Two otherwise.
Is that where I'm at? So I would try 61 and then we'll keep on talking. Okay?
Please adjourn.